Hey there everybody, Caleb Watson here, and today I'm going to be showing you my presentation for organizational behavior, applying motivational models to the real world and the new workforce. I hope you find it informative and maybe, just maybe, enjoy it just a little bit. Without further ado, let's get started. So, first up, facts that I think I know. Throughout the years, people have come up with many different types of motivational models that attempt to explain, quantify, or otherwise factor human motivation. We've seen this throughout the different motivational models we've studied throughout our textbook, where people have taken very differing viewpoints on how motivation actually works in people, and this leads to differing opinions about what actually motivates certain groups of people, and where one model would make sense for one person, it really might not make sense for another. And we'll come across that in my later point on how a cohesive model where we factor in all the different theories and models of motivation can be possibly more effective than just focusing on one theory or model of motivation. Second fact here that I think I know, these models tend to revolve around factors such as intrinsic or extrinsic motivation, that's internal or external motivation, work styles, as well as the setting or situation in the workplace. The third fact that I think I know is something that we sort of touched on earlier. It's that an approach that takes into account all theories of motivation and takes them with a grain of salt will be more effective than an approach that does not. So again, that's what I touched on earlier, explained in a bit more of a clear form. So, my 3 questions for this project are as follows. 1. Should a cohesive model be applied to everyone, or do some people have different motivating factors than others? So I will admit, this one's a little bit of an asked and answered sort of deal, because this is pretty clearly explained in our textbook that yes, in fact, that some people have different motivating factors than others. Some people have a big drive to communicate and foster relationships with their coworkers. Some people are really into, say, the nitty-gritty of working on, a day trading floor in Wall Street or something of that nature. So this is, again, not really much of a question, but I threw it in there anyways because I would like to drive that point home. Number 2. Do these models make sense in the real world or at all? So this is kind of a big question, but I wanted to put it in there because I wanted to talk about it a little bit. These models, they do, I think, make sense in the real world. Of course, this is a question, so I don't want to just outright say that, but I really do feel like they do make sense in the real world. Some people think that they don't. And those people take it too literally. I will examine further why that too literal assumption can become an issue, because the point I will make is that models are simplified versions of reality, and one can't hold actual events super strictly to these models. There's certain factors you won't know about, or certain factors that are just not even, on the scale or in the table here. So, again, that's why I said earlier, a grain of salt. So, third question. What motivating and maintenance factors... Third question. I'll have to do the third question later. Third question. What motivating and maintenance factors will be important for Generation Z compared to millennials in the workforce? So this is going to be a pretty meaty question, probably meatier than the others, a lot more substance because it's pretty specific. It's a lot less broad here than this, and a lot more less obvious than this one. So, and it'll be a big part of what I touch on here in just a moment. So, moving on. So before we get to any questions, I want to touch on a few quick slides to give us a sort of refresher of the different models and theories we have seen so far in this organizational behavior course. Okay, so first up, we have the classic, the one and only Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And this is the theory that as lower needs are fulfilled in a person, such as the need for shelter, food, water, etc., the higher need becomes the next motivator. So once we get food, water, then we'll want, shelter and security. Then we'll probably want to band up with a few other people, and and this goes on and on and on. The next up is two-factor theory. Job satisfaction here is linked to either intrinsic factors or extrinsic, with the dissatisfaction typically being related to extrinsic factors in the two-factor theory. And another thing in two-factor theory you may recall is hygiene factors. These are things that don't necessarily motivate an employee. They don't demotivate an employee either, but they will demotivate an employee if they aren't there. So these are things like air conditioning in a very hot building in countries where air conditioning is the norm, things like that. You wouldn't want to work there, but at the same time, you don't go into work every day like, wow, I can't wait for that air conditioner to be on, because it's just something that, yeah, that's really good, but it's not gonna get you to work every day just because there's an air conditioner. Unless the air conditioner's out in your house, but that's a whole nother story. So, third one is McClellan's theory of needs. And this is the one that states that achievement, power, and affiliation are the three most important needs that help explain motivation in people. And I guess this one is partly true. I don't really jive with this one too much, but it was presented in our material, and you'll recall it being presented with the three different factors there, almost looking like algebra. Achievement, power, and affiliation being marked as in-ac for achievement, in-pow for power, and of course in-af for affiliation. So now we're going to take a look at a few contemporary models of motivation. First up is going to be self-determination theory. This is a theory of motivation that's concerned with the beneficial effects of intrinsic motivation and possibly the harmful effects of extrinsic factors. It's related to cognitive evaluation theory. It's a complementary theory stating that extrinsic rewards will actually reduce someone's motivations in a task. You heard that right. Reduce it. An example here would be a volunteer worker that enjoys coming and volunteering at a particular place, and in fact enjoys it so much she can often be seen there for 10, 15, 20 hours a week, even though she's not being compensated for anything other than her own fulfillment, essentially. Say she volunteers there so much, they say, wow, you really put in so much time here out of your own good heart and spirit. We're going to bring you on as, a full-time director here, and we're going to actually pay you. She might absolutely drop it right then and there, because it wasn't about that for her. They took it completely another route that she didn't want to be involved with. And this can be seen in a lot of different professions, and you kind of have to look hard for it sometimes. But this theory does hold true in some cases, for sure. Again, this theory reinforces the idea of self-concordance, or the degree to which someone's reason for pursuing a goal is consistent with their own interests and their own core values. An example I could think of for this, kind of a weird one, but a priest would not be too pleased working at a strip club. He probably wouldn't get much done. Or maybe he'd be too pleased and not get anything done. Who am I to judge? Anyways. Next up is goal setting theory. This is the setting of specific and difficult goals and providing feedback and support during that will lead to a higher performance. That is the theory, essentially. The three personal factors influencing the goals related to performance here in this theory, goal setting theory, is 1, goal commitment, 2, task characteristics, and 3, national culture, or where the person's from, how they grew up, the sort of culture that they're familiar with in regards to goals and the achievement of such. The third is reinforcement theory, and that theory asserts that behavior is essentially a function of its consequences. An example of this might be going really hard at the gym, even though it kind of hurts. Hopefully not too painful, though. Or getting up really early on a freezing morning to work a hard job. These will have consequences, and that's usually used in a negative term or a negative connotation, but they still do have consequences, but they're good ones. And sometimes if that specific consequence is worth it, then the person will engage in that behavior, or at least attempt to, in reality. So in contrast to goal-setting theory, which is a cognitive or person-centered approach, reinforcement theory is a behavioralistic view. Simply put, in contrast to goal-setting theory, it's arguing essentially that reinforcement conditions our behavior and not the other way around. So I could go on explaining a number of others, but hopefully those watching this presentation will already be familiar with some or maybe all the models and theories. So I'm just going to go ahead and move on. So next up, we'll look at a few examples and see if we can answer some of the original questions that I posed at the beginning. So question number 1. We already kind of asked and answered this one earlier, but I'll still go over it for, presentation's sake. Should a cohesive model be applied to everyone, or do some people have different motivating factors? So, answer. As we've seen in the theories and research of organizational behavior, both in the field and in our textbook, as well as numerous examples we've probably encountered personally, everyone has their own reasons behind their own motivations. So everyone will require unique consideration. So an example. I kind of like examples about coffee shops because, for one, I love coffee and I used to work in a coffee shop. So when I worked at the shop, I found that some of my coworkers really found their main motivation in serving individual customers and making the day of regulars that came in. Other coworkers seem to be more motivated towards crafting the perfect coffee beverage. This wasn't so much like a Starbucks or a Dunkin' Donuts. This was sort of a more high-end shop. And some people definitely, some of my coworkers there definitely got their kicks from crafting the perfect coffee beverage. And it wasn't that they didn't pay attention or gave bad customer service, but you could tell what was getting them in there every day. It wasn't really the smiles, but it was getting that perfect espresso shot or what have you. And of course, some of my coworkers found motivation in both of these aspects sometimes. So everybody's a little different. Question number 2. Do these models make sense in the real world or at all? Answer. So this question's intentionally open-ended and broad, as it allows me to stress something. These models are exactly that. They're just models. One shouldn't disregard these simply because they can't be perfectly applied to real-life situations. They're a simplified version of reality, allowing us to make better, more clear-headed decisions. I definitely think this is the case. So, the bigger question here. What motivating and maintenance factors will be important for Generation Z compared to millennials in the workforce? So, answers. Generation Z seems to have more in common with their grandparents and even their great-grandparents than millennials do. They appear to be hardworking, determined, independent, and striving for financial stability. They tend to hold more conservative views than the generation prior to them because they grew up during the Great Recession, the age of school and mass public shooters, and domestic terrorist events as well. Many in Generation Z have kind of seen their families and friends lose everything they had during the Great Recession, or maybe at least just a lot of what they had. So they grew up knowing that there's uncertainty in the world, as one economist, Angie Reid, put it. Many in Generation Z have seen both their family and friends' families lose most, if not everything, during the Great Recession. So they grew up knowing that there's a great amount of uncertainty in the world. Many in Generation Z have seen their family and their friends' families lose most, if not everything, during the Great Recession. They know that there is uncertainty in the world, as Angie Reid put it in an interview that I have linked there at the bottom. These formative events seem not to only have contributed to an increased work ethic in many Gen Z members, but also an increased emphasis on their own fair compensation as well as their personal financial stability. So, answering question 3 a bit further. How can firms and organizations better motivate members of Gen Z as they enter the workforce? One thing that really sticks out to me is to take a stand on an issue that's important to them, really mean it, and to stick to it. I've seen a lot of companies do this, and I think it's really, really important. It establishes a lot of trust in the future leaders that are going to be working, and taking a stand on things like gender, racial, or sexual orientation equality, fair compensation for workers in comparison with CEOs, as well as environmental sustainability are 3 really big ones that I've seen a lot. And I would like to see more companies take up initiatives that allow them to publicly leverage their company's brand to, help hopefully make a better place of the world. And of course, valuing their opinions and input and being completely transparent and authentic is so essential with communicating with Gen Z. It's just not really tolerated to keep anything from them. So, what are the worst ways to try and motivate this generation? Having personally experienced the talking down effect, it's really frustrating. If you talk down to someone, you're pretty much showing that you fully do not trust their competence to the point where you feel the need to dumb things down so they can actually understand it. And it's just not a good it's not a good look. It's not good. As for marketing, one really can't win over most members of Gen Z without a sense of familiarity and personal trust with the brand. This goes further than what familiarity used to mean in marketing. It's really a lot more than seeing the same package in the store that you have for decades. In this more conversational marketing, as I like to call it, Gen Zers feel like they should be able to trust a brand like they would a friend. And in many cases, they actually can talk to them as well via social media. Oftentimes, brands can be found having conversations of, actual substance and weight with some of their followers. Another quote from Angie Reid from that one article, Gen Zers can smell BS from a mile away. And I think this is an incredibly accurate assessment. This authenticity and commitment to certain sides of social issues by brands can honestly scare the friggin' pants off of some old school marketers, but I think it's the new way, and in this world, it's kind of adapt or die. So in conclusion, why should I care? Knowledge of motivational theories is different than their practical application. Effectively applying them as a lifelong goal, one should always strive to improve upon. So my first subpoint here might be a bit too fluffy for Gen Zers, so I'll put it this way. Learning how to apply these models practically at work will not only increase effectiveness and job satisfaction, it'll impress your boss and you'll make more cash in the long term. More money. You will get more money. Another reason you should care. Increase trust and connection with coworkers or employees you're going to be managing or maybe will manage in the future. Another reason you should care? You get to know where members of Gen Z are really coming from and how this is going to impact the future of humanity. Another final reason you should care is that any Gen Zers watching this might find some insight into their own personal motivations, as well as the motivations of their peers. Here are my sources cited. Feel free to pause the presentation here if you'd like to go check them out. So, as always, I wanted to thank you all for watching. This has been Caleb Watson, and I hope you all have a wonderful, motivated day.